followed by the invocation. Father, as we approach the 4th of July, we praise you for this wonderful country that we are blessed to live in and for all the freedoms that we enjoy. We pray that you watch over us and guide us this evening. In your name we pray. Amen. Want to start with this? I was previously contacted by Supervisor Skinner letting me know that he would not be able to be physically present this evening due to previously scheduled travel. He'll be participating remotely from Williamsburg Plantation in Williamsburg, Virginia. So I hereby move that the board approve Supervisor Skinner's remote participation in tonight's meeting. Vote.
Six yes, motion passes.
Secondly, I move that the board suspend the portion of Section 2-5B of the board's bylaws, which require an electronic vote to be replaced by roll call voting while Supervisor Skinner participates in the meeting.
Six yes, motion passes.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. The first item on your agenda this evening is the approval of the agenda, including possible agenda additions, and there are no additional items for consideration, so it's the agenda as published.
Is there a motion? All right. Mr. Benton?
Roll call.
Roll call vote. Aye. Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
And Mr. Skinner to approve the agenda.
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is the presentation of the consent agenda. If I can have the floor computer, please. First item on the consent agenda this evening is the acceptance, budget adjustment, and appropriation of additional federal funds for the Virginia Department of Health Child Safety Seat Check Station Coordinator Project. This total grant is for $12,890, and there is no local match. Item 2 is the appointment of Kristen Gallick to the Rappahannock Area Youth Services and Group Home Commission. That term expires June 20th, 2020. Item 3 is the approval of contract to Borman Grooves Vogel Group Incorporated to provide professional architectural and engineering services for design of Fire Station Company 6. That's for the bunk room addition. That contract is in the amount of $279,890. Item 4 is to approve the contract to W.C. Spratt for Hunting Run Park Phase 2 improvements in the amount of $860,348. Item 5 is the authorization for the sale of 2019 bonds in a future public hearing. Item 6 is a budget adjustment and approved purchase orders to Colonial Ford Truck Sales, Inc. and Battlefield Ford, Inc. Colonial is for 2 crane trucks in the amount of $255,324.88, and Battlefield Ford is for 3 utility service trucks in the amount of $254,658. Item 7 is the reappointment of Mary Sorrell to the Rappahannock Juvenile Detention Commission as an alternate. That term expires June 25th, 2023. And item number 8 is the reappointment of Linda Ball to the Rappahannock Area Community Services Board. That term commences July 1, 2019 and expires June 30th, 2022. And that is your consent agenda for this evening.
Do any supervisors wish to pull any items off of the consent agenda? Seeing none, do we have anyone signed up to speak to the consent agenda?
No, sir.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to speak on the consent agenda at this time? If not, we will dispense with the first public presentation. Is there a motion on the consent agenda itself?
So moved.
Mr. Skinner, Mr. Skinner on the consent agenda?
Right, aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is the public presentations.
There are no citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to address the board at this time? If not, we will close public presentation. Anyone who wishes to present to the board, please come forward.
Come up to the podium.
If you could step up to the podium, please. Amy, can you read the guidelines, please?
Sure can. Public presentations are an opportunity for you to present matters you believe deserve the board's attention. These presentations are not part of a public hearing. Sign up to speak at each public hearing is separate. Public presentations are one-way comments from you to the Board of Supervisors. They are not a forum for dialogue or debate. To make a public presentation, please sign up on the provided sign-up sheet and print clearly. Come to the lectern when your name is called. Clearly state your name and voting district for the record. Address your comments directly to the board. State whether you are speaking on your own behalf, which you will have 3 minutes to speak, or state that you are speaking on behalf of a group and you will have 5 minutes to speak. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters subject to public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. Written comments are always welcome.
Make the comments now, or am I signing to make the comments later?
No, make comments now.
No, okay. My name is Darren O'Shields. I'm with the Battlefield District. Good afternoon. I'm a Spotsylvania County resident, and I come to you today with a topic of concern to many Spotsylvania County residents as well as others around the state of Virginia. Due to an unexplainable outbreak of a very serious condition, I respectfully request that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors commission a study to determine why so many of our county residents have been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. NPD is a rare behavioral or mental health condition found predominantly in men, and it causes an excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, and an inability to handle any criticism, and an inability to admit wrongdoing. For many residents of the county, it is a reported cause for their JDR and appeals court decisions, and it is the reported cause for the negative interactions with the Department of Social Services. According to court transcripts and case files, there have been over 60 reported cases in Spotsylvania County in the last 18 months. I'm confident there are more. Regardless, 60 cases are significant considering NPD only affects 1 in 200,000 per year, according to a report by the Mayo Clinic. NPD is often diagnosed during a person's teen years and can last a lifetime. There are 2 Spotsylvania County residents in this room who are diagnosed at age 60. This is bothersome. I have a great amount of data on the condition, the areas most affected, the people most likely affected, and what state agencies we've been in contact with prior to diagnosis. A good start for a commission study would be to contact Dr. Andrew James Anderson, a clinical psychologist from Lynchburg, Virginia, who is reportedly the state expert on this condition. He appears to be so proficient in his job that he can diagnose the condition in a couple of hours with no medical history review, no medical examination, and no genetic testing. Dr. Anderson should be easy to contact because he is the state psychologist for all Child Protective Services cases. According to the Virginia State Budget Report of 2018, Spotsylvania County has access to funds in the Environmental Health Hazards account to the sum of some $11 million. The Department of Social Services budget for last year was over $2 billion. And if the county cannot find the funds to commission the study, my wife Carrie and I have pledged $100 to the county in support of this effort, payable immediately. After speaking with other concerned citizens in the area, our combined pledge as of this moment is $4,100. We ask that you look into this outbreak of NPD for not only our sake, but for the sake of you and yours. I thank you in advance for your time and careful consideration of our request. We hope that you look into this matter post haste. And again, thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board at this time?
Good evening. My name is James Curtin. I am no longer a Spotsylvania County resident. I live in Frederick County now. I was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder by Dr. Anderson during a DSS action that was taking place with my family. Dr. Anderson saw me for about an hour and was able to make this diagnosis. My father, Dr. James Allen Curtin, ran the Department of Medicine at the Washington Hospital Center, taught medicine at Georgetown, GW, and Johns Hopkins Universities. He was also the chairman of the Board of Regents of the American College of Physicians. I have a difficult time understanding how a doctor that spoke to me for less than an hour could make this diagnosis when no other doctor that's ever seen me, including my father, who of course has known me all my life, was able to do so. It's very concerning to me that this is happening, and I would very much appreciate it if the board would consider this, looking into this situation and finding out what exactly is going on. It's troubling, to say the very least. Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public presentations.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is board reports, and I would ask at the end that I have some reports as well. Thank you.
Mr. Yakubowski,
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Nothing to report.
Mr. Ross.
I just had one thing, and it was by the editorial board of the Freelance Star this week, and you caught me off guard. I should have been more aware. But it talked about Alice and United Way and the funding that it takes to sustain a family in Spotsylvania County and Fredericksburg and Stafford. And it was surprising, but not too surprising to me, that in Spotsylvania County, 41% of the population is eligible for just barely getting by. And and I don't want to do it, I don't have it in front of me, but the third highest, thank you, Tim. So I'm just going to read it, and I think it's something that we need to keep in mind as we go to budget season. So in Spotsylvania County, 41% of the population is in this ALICE category with an annual income below $75,720 deemed necessary to adequately feed, clothe, and shelter a family of four. It does say in Stafford County that amount is $81,288, and it's 35% of the population in Stafford. I think 39% was in Fredericksburg. But the paper brings out, it is interesting to note that in all three of these jurisdictions, taxes are the third largest expense after housing and child care. So every time elected officials raise taxes, which they all just did, they make it even harder for Alice families to make ends meet. And I think it's just something for us to be aware of. And if we can get in contact with I think the United Way put this out, I'd like to know more about it. So, thank you.
Mr. Benton.
No report.
Mr. Marshall.
No report.
Mr. Skinner, do you have a board report? And I have no report.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have a couple of brief announcements. First, the 15th Annual Stars and Stripes Spectacular returns to Spotsylvania Courthouse District Saturday, June 29th from 3 to 10 p.m. The event includes 4 stages of live music and entertainment, free children's rides and activities, food vendors, as well as demonstrations from fire and rescue, the sheriff's office, and the military. Free tours of historic Spotsylvania Courthouse, the old jail, and the county museum will also be offered. Now, this year, for the first time, we will have a walking parade that gets underway at 3:30 p.m. at the Holbert Building front parking lot. There's plenty of free parking at Cortland High School, Cortland Elementary School, and Courthouse Road Elementary, where shuttle buses will transport attendees to Robert E. Lee Elementary School. There's limited free parking at the Public Safety Building and limited $5 parking in the field at the corner of Brock Road and Courthouse Bypass. The rain date for this event is June 30th. And there will be numerous road closures associated with this event. And if citizens need more information, they can check out our website at www.spotsylvania.va.us. The second item that I have is an update on 3 of our capital projects. The Judicial Center expansion. Staff is working with the contractor to identify potential groundbreaking dates. The contractor continues to do preliminary work, including subcontractor identification and shop drawings. The animal shelter construction. Base paving is now planned for the second portion of the parking lot relocation, which will allow the animal shelter staff parking to be relocated so that the contractor can begin the site work preparation for the vertical expansion on the animal shelter. And Merchant Square, we issued task order this week for the A&E services related to refit the first floor space. That task order has been submitted to procurement. And then lastly, I have a update on the S-Power project. The 2 site plan applications were submitted on April 16th, both on Site A. One site plan is for the substation, and one is for 165 megawatts on 1,960 acres. The site plans have been through an initial review, and comment letters were issued May 30th. S-Power is amending the site plans in response to those comments. The S-Power contractor is mobilizing equipment to the site using the existing entrance from Orange Plank Road. Mobilization and staging of the equipment will continue until Friday, July 19th. They will be offloading equipment from 9 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. daily, except Sundays. Deliveries will consist of 6 to 7 trucks per day. VDOT certified flaggers will be used as necessary to ensure safety at the entrance. The equipment will remain on site. No land disturbance or construction activities are permitted at this time. There have been no permit requests to date for burning debris. So that's where we're at. As far as next steps go, S-Power plans to request an early clearing and grading permit prior to full approval of the site plans so that they can begin to grade the land. This is a typical approach taken by development. They will need to meet all of the erosion and sediment control regulations in order to be granted this permit. In addition, there are a number of conditions of the special use permit that need to be satisfied prior to any land disturbance. Staff is working with S-Power to ensure compliance with those conditions. And finally, on the utility side, S-Power has submitted plans for the 12-inch extension that are under review by staff. Discussions continue on potential future land locations and the 16-inch water main upgrade, and we are awaiting pricing back from S-Power for development of a cost share agreement. And finally, S-Power has reiterated their commitment for the $3.5 million for the utility upgrades for the S-Power project.
Any board members have questions or comments? Are we ready for public hearings?
Yes, sir, we are. That brings us to our first public hearing of the evening. And our first public hearing of the evening is R18-0004. It's 11.684 acres, Ladysmith Road LLC. And this is in the Battlefield District. And Mr. Hughes is here to present.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. As stated, this is a request to rezone approximately 4.79 acres from residential 2R2 to commercial 3C3 with proffers for commercial development. The property is located on the west side of Jefferson Davis Highway, Route 1, approximately 820 feet north of the Spotsylvania Parkway, Route 628 and Jefferson Davis Highway intersection. The property is located within the primary development boundary and is identified as tax parcel number 35A102. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on June 5th and voted 7-0 to recommend approval with proffers. Staff also recommends approval of the request. This is a zoning map. The subject parcel is depicted with the stripes in blue. As you can see that the predominant zoning in the area is commercial 3. This is an area view that shows the subject parcel identified in red, and you can note that the dominant development pattern in this area is commercial uses. This parcel sits between the new auto zone and the strip center, which houses the El Patron Mexican restaurant, as well as a Wings to Go restaurant and a dry cleaners facility. This is the applicant's GDP, and although no tenants have committed to the property, the applicant has developed the GDP that shows a potential of how the parcel may be developed with intense commercial uses that meet the bulk standards for the parcel. This represents a potential 75-room hotel with a 1,000 square foot restaurant and a conference facility in the hotel, and an out parcel on the front of the parcel that would house potentially a 9,000 square foot commercial building. The property will have two access points, one a right in, right out on Jeff Davis Highway here, with a shared entrance with the existing commercial development, and also a inter-parcel connection here in the middle of the parcel, which accesses the service road that runs behind the Wawa and extends over to the light at Route 1 and Route 17. Currently, that leg of the signal is the last queuing light in that signal, and so there are some delays at that light right now. I think it's a short cycle, so like 4 cars can go through. Staff is going to approach VDOT about potential reviewing the signal timing there to maybe improve that the cycle on that side of the signal. The green line on the GDP here represents the edge of development, or where it will stop, as the balance of the property in this white area here contains wetlands and steep slopes and is unable to be developed. The gray area here will be pervious pavement that will allow for improved water quality for runoff, excuse me, and also reduce the rate of stormwater runoff. The comp plan presents a long-range land vision for the county. The comprehensive plan sets forth the principles, goals, and policies and implementation techniques that will guide the development activity within the county. The proposal is located within the primary development boundary and in an area identified for commercial development on the future land use map. And this proposal is consistent with the existing development patterns in the area. There'd be minimal impact on public facilities and the transportation network. The applicant has proffered conformance with the generalized development plan. The proffers also include a prohibition on several uses that include vehicle sales large, that is a by right in the commercial 3 district, building material yards, and auction establishments. The proffers also include design criteria that will make the development consistent with the existing development to the north and south. The financial impact is that if approved, a change to the zoning will increase the property value, thus increase revenues for the county. Key finding, this is the lone parcel in this section of Route 1 without a commercial designation. The proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan and will add to the county's tax base with limited impacts on public facilities. It will not decrease the levels of service on the transportation network, and as I stated, is also consistent with the existing development patterns. The single finding against is that the project does not have any commitments from tenants, so it is not possible to know what the ultimate user will be at this time. The project is consistent with the comp plan and will allow a vacant parcel to be developed in a manner that is consistent with current development to the north and to the south. And if approved, all of the property in this section of Route 1 will have a commercial designation. Although the applicant does not have any tenants, the proffers commit to the development of similar character to the existing patterns, and the GDP shows intense commercial development on which the public facility and traffic analysis was performed and found to result in minimal impacts. So based on the findings in favor, staff recommends approval of R 18004 with proffers. The applicant is present but does not have a presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions, Mr. Yakubowski?
Thank you. Just 2 questions real quick. On the proposed GDP here, just to make sure, I know that there's a connection over in front of the Goodwill and by the Strip also. There seems to be a connection over to the AutoZone too, so all of those commercial parcels will be interconnected from the CVS all the way down to the Wawa, correct?
Well, that's not correct. There actually is not a connection to the AutoZone. Because of the environmental impacts and the topography going in that direction.
There's no way to do it?
That's correct, sir. There's a significant
Okay.
drop-off going towards AutoZone.
Oh, traffic-wise, right. Well,
No, I mean, between the two parcels, the topography changes significantly.
the topography, yes.
And then there's wetlands that also come into that area as well.
Okay, well, then, my biggest concern then, especially with a proposal of a hotel that might be there, is the only way to get out onto Route 1 North then would be the light over by Wawa. And I know dealing with VDOT is not always easy. And so I would like to see, and I know you said that you would, but that needs to be improved because that traffic, especially on a Saturday, you throw in people traveling, stopping, I mean, it's going to be an even larger mess than it currently is. And then the other question, just to reiterate, one of the uses that is not allowed are car dealers. Used car dealer is taken out of there too. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board? If not, we can open the public hearing. Is there anyone signed up?
No, sir.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to address this topic at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Mr. Yakubowski,
Motion to approve.
is there any discussion?
And that's with the proffers, Mr. Yakubowski?
Correct.
Thank you.
We'll start at your end. Mr. Yakubowski,
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Aye.
Mr. Ross,
Aye.
Mr. Benton,
Aye.
Mr. Marshall,
Aye.
Mr. Skinner, and the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, the next public hearing on the agenda is R18-0009. That's SRSF Investments LLC, and this is in the Livingston District.
As stated, this is a request to rezone approximately 1.8 acres from RU to mixed-use 4 with proffers and alternative development standards to allow the renovation of an existing house for a law office and to allow a separate residential structure to remain on the property. The parcel is addressed as 9134 Courthouse Road and is identified as tax parcel number 47-A-148. The property is located on the north side of Courthouse Road, Business 208, approximately 1,300 feet west of Courthouse Commons Boulevard, Route 1486, and approximately 1,300 feet east of the intersection of Courthouse Road and Brock Road, Route 613. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on June 5th, 2019, and voted 7-0 to recommend approval with the proffers and alternative standards. Staff also recommends approval of the request with the proffers and alternative standards. This is a zoning map of the subject parcel, which is identified in green with the red stripes. As you can see, the predominant use in the area is mixed use to the east and north, which is the Spotsylvania Courthouse Village project. The property to the west is the Younger Law Office and is zoned O1. And to the west, or to the south, are commercial uses dominated by office uses and a retail use. This aerial view shows the subject parcel again in red. As you can see, the dominant development pattern of the area are commercial and office uses. Redevelopment of this parcel is intended to be in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. This is the applicant's GDP. The image on the left in beige shows the entire parcel with 110 feet of frontage on Courthouse Road, extending 791 feet to the north with 102 feet along the rear property line. The close-up on the right shows the proposed improvements. These improvements include sidewalk along Courthouse Road improved parking areas, the addition of 830 square feet of office space onto the rear of the main residential structure to be converted to the law office, and the existing residential use that will remain a residential use. Because of site constraints and overhead power lines, the applicant is proposing a modified street buffer with a shrub row in lieu of the standard canopy and understory trees shown in the green area on the frontage of the property here. Staff is supportive of this modification. The applicant, in accordance with the allowance provided in the MU zoning district, is proposing alternative development standards to allow the property to accommodate the proposed uses. The alternative standards proposed include a slightly wider lot width, a larger lot area, and an alternative to the primary build-to zone for detached structures. An alternative to the requirement that 70% of the structures have a setback of no greater than 45 feet, and to allow 90-degree parking on streets. So essentially, in the MU classification, would be deemed a street, and this is the 90-degree parking that the applicant is proposing. Staff does support the alternative development standards as they allow the property to be developed with limited change to the character of the property. The applicant has proffered an interparcel connection to the property to the east, which is the Spotsylvania Courthouse Village, and that exact location will be determined when that property develops. Because right now, the owner of that property didn't have any plans that would show where a potential connection should be, but the applicant has proffered that in the future a connection would be allowed. The proposed use does not generate a significant number of vehicle trips and thus may be developed with a low-volume commercial entrance onto Route 208. The Spotsylvania Comprehensive Plan presents the long-range vision for the county. The comp plan sets forth the principles, goals, and policies and implementation techniques that will guide the development activity within the county. The proposal is located within the primary development boundary. This area is identified for mixed-use development on the future land use map, and this request is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. The applicant has proffered conformance with the generalized development plan, the dedication of right-of-way, and proposed alternative development standards to the lot width, lot area, build-to zone for detached structures, and for allowance of 90-degree parking. Staff supports the acceptance of the proffers and approval of the alternative development standards. If approved, the change to the mixed-use classification will have an immediate positive fiscal impact with increased land values. Findings in favor: the parcel is the lone parcel in this section of Courthouse Road without a commercial, office, or MU designation. The project is an adaptive reuse of a structure that will preserve the character along Courthouse Road. The proposal is consistent with the comp plan and future development and future land use map, and the proposal will not decrease level of services on the transportation network. There were no findings against the proposal. Staff's recommendation: the project is consistent, as I noted, with the comp plan, will allow an adaptive reuse of a structure that will preserve some of the character along Courthouse Road, and the retention of the residential use supports the goal of the mixed-use district by keeping residents in the neighborhood to provide support for the commercial uses. Approving this request with the proposed alternative development standards will allow the parcel to be developed in a manner that is consistent with the current development in the area, and the GDP is designed to accommodate future mixed-use development. If approved, all of the zoning classifications along this section of Courthouse Road will be either commercial, office, or mixed use. And therefore, based on the findings in favor, staff recommends approval of R 18009 with the proffers and alternative development standards. The applicant is here to answer any questions, but does not have a presentation. And this concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Mr. Ross?
So I just have one question on the mixed-use part. So could that be residential, apartments and/or townhomes?
At some point in the future, it certainly could be, yes.
So would that, and if we designate it mixed use tonight, we wouldn't have an approval, say there's an apartment building in the future? That's my concern.
No, they would have to come back and amend their GDP right now.
They would.
Right, because the GDP right now shows two structures, an existing house, and then a separate residential structure at the rear. The house is going to be converted to a law office, and then the structure at the rear will remain a residential use.
So if they were to put want to do something such as build an apartment complex in the back, they would have to come back to the board.
Yes, an amended GDP. Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from the board? If not, we can open the public hearing. Is there anyone signed up to speak?
No, sir.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to speak on this topic at this time? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
I'd make a motion to approve with the proffers and alternative development standards.
Is there any discussion? If not, we can vote. Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is presentations and reports by others. The first item on the agenda is Print Mail Communications, that's PMC, and the Economic Development Authority's presentation of proposed economics incentives to PMC.
Whoops. It's better if the light is brighter. I learned that. That's twice now I've learned that. You have received a email from Amy that has a diagram that is helpful, and I would like to just start by mentioning that. It's really kind of a red and blue diagram. It should say PMC on it. And it is essentially showing that there are two periods. There was an initial period shown in red, which is a 10-year period, and about halfway through that period, the company came forward to the EDA and requested a new agreement. So there's an overlap between the red and the blue, and there's some funds that are unexpended from the original red portion of the agreement. So Mr. Payne has prepared a number of slides that go into detail, and I won't try to mimic that. We basically don't disagree on the facts, and so we're just presenting them to you through him. I have with me Mr. Edwin Pardue from the EDA, who is Mr. Benton's appointee and was around during the time that this project was reviewed. I will say that the EDA and council have learned over the years about agreements and complications and timelines and changes and things of that sort. We also did this agreement with only two signatures, being the company and the EDA, and we now always do agreements with 3 signatures. So the process has evolved, and we're getting better at this. So with that simple introduction, again, I'm not going to go through all the slides that Mr. Payne has prepared, and he is here representing Dave Pullen, Dave and Larry Pullen. Larry is here, owner of the company, if there are any questions. So if you would agree, we could just have Charlie's slides presented at this time.
Mr. Chairman, other members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Charlie Payne, law firm Herschel, and represent Print Mail Communications. Thank you for your time this evening, and happy early 4th of July. Tom, thank you very much for that introduction. I thought I was going to get out of having to present these slides, and you were going to do it, but it looks like I'm stuck with it. And I don't know, I did send these slides to each of you before this meeting tonight, and I'll try to get through these as quickly as possible, but just some real quick background. Maybe that's an easier way to go about this, and I can address some questions. Print Mail Communications originated in Fairfax County. Mr. Pullen's father, David, started this company in 1971. In 2013, they relocated to Spotsylvania County. As part of that, there was a performance agreement that was entered into between the EDA and my client. That performance agreement was bifurcated in a couple of parts. There was a first 5-year plan, if you will, which included my client relocating here to Spotsylvania County to employ at least 80 individuals here. And that would have to continue through the full 10-year term of the agreement. And I say it's bifurcated because the second part of this would continue for the second 5 years if my client was to continue leasing their current facility, which is out at Kisner's Industrial Park. And if, Tom, if you could go to maybe the third slide so they can see that location. If you see the location, the red dot, I don't know if you can blow that up or not, but the red dot there is where the current facility is. It's about 161,000 square feet. My client was only required to lease at least 98,100 square feet of that facility. Very quickly, they expanded in leasing the entire facility. So they were running pretty quickly in 2013 to 2018. So prior to the expiration of the first stage of this, if you will, which they were doing very well, they came to the EDA asking if they could amend the performance agreement because they were contemplating acquiring the facility and also investing in new equipment, extensively investing in new equipment. That's what the proposed amendment was to the EDA. So at that point in time, property under contract went to the EDA requesting this change, which would incentivize my client to move forward with that acquisition and investment. We met with the EDA in March, April of 2018. In 2018, July of 2018, the EDA recommended that the performance agreement be amended to include an additional $416,000 in BPOL reimbursement if my client met all the performance standards, acquired the property, which they did, which was over $7 million. They're also planning to invest another $400,000+ to improve the property, and they invested $2.5 million in new equipment. I'm sure you're very familiar with the print industry. It is not necessarily the most fastest growing industry today, especially with digital printing and online marketing processes, which have taken over in many ways. My clients may be able to find a niche. They have invested in Spotsylvania County. They employ consistently well over 200 people, 200 persons from this area. Many of those folks are entry level with no skills. You can imagine the challenges there of training some of these folks and keeping them on board. So they have met every single performance standard that's put before them by the county. So what you're seeing in the amendment is actually something quite different than what was originally agreed to. And of course, the request was to assist us in incentivizing us to move forward with the acquisition and the new investment, which we did, based on, in many ways, a recommendation of the EDA in July of 2018. Sorry it's taken so long, I guess, to get to this point. We obviously, again, my client is here, very grateful for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to continue to expand their business. I was talking to my client earlier today. They deal with about 15 million to 20 million pieces of mail per month. They work and contract with over 50 local vendors. So again, this is the request that's before, I guess, you guys. Before, this was an agreement just between the EDA and my client. And obviously, we're here today to answer any questions you may have or address any concerns. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anyone on the board have questions or comments? Mr. Benton?
I'll say, wasn't this a little different than what we've done in the past? Because, I mean, your client didn't have in their contract or something with the EDA the provisions to renew or redo. I'm concerned that we're going to open up the Pandora box of, well, when everybody's successful, and I'm glad you're successful, sir. I'm very happy for you. But I just don't want to open up that box where everybody who feels they're doing real well can just rewrite, basically, agreements that have been had.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and we're certainly not trying to open the door here for what is not a reasonable request. But the deal sort of changed as the company progressed forward. So the initial deal was just to lease space and stay here, obviously. still had to meet the performance standards in order to get the reimbursement. Remember, we're just talking about BPOL, not that that's necessarily minor. We're not talking about real estate tax reimbursement or personal property tax reimbursement. So the initial deal was just a lease. And then to continue that lease to the full 10 years if we wanted the reimbursement. So the deal changed in the sense that my client decided to acquire the facility and then to make an additional $2.5 million investment in personal property, which was not part of the original agreement. Coming back to the EDA to request for the adjustment allowed them to move forward with acquiring the property and making the investment in personal property. So it did change in that regard, and it's not necessarily the same original agreement between the parties. So it's not that we're trying to create a precedent here, it's the fact that the original agreement did change along the path.
And I don't mind answering the question even more specifically. There have not been cases where an existing agreement was amended partway through. Doesn't mean it can't be done, it just hasn't been done. The original agreement contemplated a 10-year relationship of either leasing or buying the building, so that was already assumed in the original agreement. There was an amount of money, a cap, on the investments of $208,000. That cap has not yet been reached, so there have been there are some remaining funds yet to be rebated or yet to be given back to the company out of the $208,000 cap. So I must admit that I, and I think some of the EDA members, believed at the time that we had this discussion at the EDA that cap had either been burned up, in other words, exceeded or met, or was imminently about to do so. And that was not correct. So some of the conversation, which I take partly responsible for at the time, was that we thought that was happening. The company's ready to buy the building. We've burned up the original cap, and the EDA discussion was maybe we should do something in this situation.
Yeah, and to go further, at the time it was presented, it seemed like this new plan would be very instrumental then in the purchase of the property as presented to us, that this would be a very important step then to go ahead and make that purchase on the property, even though they had not already hit that cap with what would be reimbursed through the BPOL.
Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Chair. So a couple of the original agreement was put in place
2013.
2013. There was a minimum number of staff, and what were the original conditions of the agreement?
Well, the original agreement was to relocate from Fairfax to here. Charlie may have the details already in one of the slides, but it was less than 200 jobs, which has been reached, even exceeded during the period of time that they've been here. So they
Right. So I guess I'm looking
hiring.
more at the specifics.
Oh,
if it
okay.
was,
I've got them.
I think it was 80.
Yeah, I've got it.
yeah.
if you-
What were the specifics? So we get them on record here.
To at least 100,000 square feet of space, to employ at least 80 persons through the full term. This is all again through the full term. Relocate here to Spotsylvania County. Add or replace at least 35 more employees at the Spotsylvania plant by no later in 2015. Again, continue the lease for the second term and/or perhaps purchase the property. Endeavor to pay at least $10 an hour. Endeavor to pay at least $50,000 a year for at least 30 persons or more, et cetera, et cetera. So all of which have been exceeded. And the new incentive agreement, if you will, is to employ at least 150 persons. Payroll has gone from $4 million in 2013 to over $6 million to date. We also had to acquire the property, which we did. We have to invest $2.5 million in personal property, which has been done. So there's actually a lot of higher performance standards in this amendment than the original. So we're not continuing the performance standards from the old one. Actually, they're changing and increasing.
Right. I think that's kind of where I'm at, is that at any point at this, you can go back to 80 people and you're still within compliance of the agreement. So we're going to reset the agreement to 150 minimum maintained throughout the agreement or the incentives not met.
Correct.
Is there, this may be hard, so when you purchased the building, I'm assuming the building was assessed at a higher rate, so potentially it generated additional tax revenue. Is there any way of showing the additional tax benefit to the county based on the growth of this company? From basically the original agreement, we had 80 people, 100,000 square feet or whatever it may be, but based on where you are and where you're going, you're saying 150 people, a new building, you're investing more money. Is there a way of showing the net benefit to the county, even after you've deducted out the incentive?
We can show, obviously, the real estate tax, with the additional improvements to be made, we can show you the additional real estate tax for the new investment of personal property, 2.5 million plus. When you employ over 200 people, they're spending money in your county, they're buying gas, they're buying food, they're buying supplies, they're going to stores. You got 50-plus vendors that are benefiting from a facility of this type. And I would tell you, if you look at the overview in this development, in this park, not a whole lot of activity going on. A project like this, generating that kind of activity, does help surrounding properties very much.
Well, just to clarify one thing, because it does say you had 254, 2018, 326 W-2s were issued with 49. How many full-time, is it full-time equivalents or is it full-time employees? Full-time, and then you have additional part-time on top of that? Does that go up to the 100 plus? Okay.
I'll have Larry come up. Is that okay? Just so you can. Larry's the president and CEO of Print Mail Communications.
So at times, we'll do hand fulfillment packages. So that's when we'll bring in other folks from Germana. We've tried bringing in disabled vets, but there's just so much noise in the plant, it doesn't work. So that's when we'll swell up to a little over 250.
Okay, so there are 200 full-time and then up to potentially 100 plus more part-time?
Correct.
As needed. And do you see any additional growth?
Yes. So we did 15 million is what we're projected to do this year, did it last year. We're looking to get to about 17 million over the next 12 months going forward. Hopefully, we're going to cap out around $20 million out of that facility.
So how does this incentive help you? How are you going to reinvest this into?
The simplest way to put it is $41,000 roughly investment we're looking for per year. That's one employee that we can bring back into the facility that helps with the training side. That's the biggest hurdle we've had down here, sort of the training. As Charlie mentioned, our industry, it's different. Most folks come into our industry, we have to train directly. So we bring them along. That's the biggest help for us in that facility, is just jobs.
So you're going to hire a training employee in addition to this?
We hire constantly.
Okay.
My brother Dave originally was a salesperson for me. His full-time position he's been down here is HR. He knows out of all of our 200 employees, you can come to we're having a barbecue tomorrow. I invited anybody to come out to see our staff and see our facility. And Dave can tell you every person in that facility's name. And that's what we've done as far as becoming more employee-centric since we've been down here.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know, Larry hasn't touched on this too, but one of the other unique things about a company of this nature is folks who come in with no skills have the opportunity to gain skills and grow up through the company, which is unique. Nothing against fast food restaurants, but they typically get a lot of the unskilled entry-level employees that come in. This is an area, this business is a place where they can actually grow through there. Not all of them, but some of them can, and that's very beneficial.
Mr. Marshall.
What's the reasoning for the, in the incentive grant of the maintain no less than 150 if you've got 200 employees? I don't feel comfortable incentivizing losing jobs in the county.
We're not planning on losing any. We have to change for market adjustments in our industry. We're also investing a lot of money in higher speed equipment. So what happens is we might lose some jobs, so maybe a $12 or $15 an hour job goes away, but it's replaced by a $20 per hour job. We've also increased our staffing. When we first came down here, we had 3 mechanics. We now have about 12 mechanics in our facility. They come in, that we bring guys in, a lot of them just, all they need is a inclination to be mechanically inclined. And then we train them into maintaining our own equipment. We have our own service facilities in shop. So the reason we only said 150 because the market could shift a little bit.
So your business model and plan is to increase your technology to provide higher paying jobs?
Correct. We're investing in higher speed equipment.
And Mr. Marshall, that number is almost double what the original agreement was at 80. So it's not like we're trying to get, any, obviously below that number or at 80. We're looking to increase those jobs.
Thank
Base.
Mr. McLaughlin.
One more question here. You talked about bringing mechanics in and some other skilled trades as well. Some of the other businesses, HDT and that, we gave incentives to also establish some intern programs. Is that something you would consider? We've got our Spotsylvania, our VOTEC, and we've got a lot of kids that are coming up through this with potential opportunities to work as an intern.
We would. We certainly would. We do that quite a bit, where we'll bring a young mechanic in and have them training with this more senior mechanic to eventually get them to move on to
See, that's kind of where we'd like to see is if we do this investment with the counties, which really it's not collecting tax revenue, is if we could apply potentially using with you and the VOTEC to get some interns out there for some OJT and some things that maybe they'll grow into that job. So if you would consider that, I think that would go a long way.
I would do it. We've met with, my brother's been up to Stafford County, where they have a VOTEC program, and talked to some of the folks up there. I don't think we've had any interaction with what's down here, but we'd love to.
Well, we can do ours is better, so I think if okay, all right.
And we would love to, because the way my father started the company in 1971, when I took the company over, we developed a direct mail facility out of it. It was more of a data processing service bureau. Our best team members, as Charlie pointed out, are ones that have come on as entry level and work through the system. Some will go being mechanically inclined, they can make a good living. Some go through the programming side, they learn data services side. Some go into the clerical side, become client-facing account managers. So we all about internal training of our staff.
Okay. So you'll commit with, I'm on the board, you'll commit with me to work on
commit.
putting some interns?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a workforce training component in the original performance agreement, Tom, if you remind me if that's correct.
At one time, we put together a team that included social services and Goodwill and the state workforce agency to try to solve what has been, frankly, a chronic problem, which is recruiting and retaining entry-level employees that don't have skill, in some cases aren't computer literate and have English as a second language or whatever. So that was kind of the number one issue that we started working on some time ago. There wasn't a miracle solution. So the company has kind of taken it under their wing to just do a better job of what they're doing. And I should clarify, Mr. McLaughlin, that the existing building remains at about the same assessed value now as it was before. So although there have been some improvements, the additional tax revenue to be gained from the company over the coming years would be primarily from new equipment, tangible personal property tax, and not from a dramatic increase in the real estate tax value. An empty building still pays real estate tax, although frankly that building sat there a long time empty. And we lamented that for years around here, wishing that somebody would come along and make it happen.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. Couple of things. First of all, my comments have nothing to do with your business and how well you're doing. I think it's fantastic that you are employing lots of people and doing quite well. And obviously, the incentive package that started this all has proved well because you are growing and investing and looking to do even more. But I want to start at the beginning of this. Why are we doing this in public? We do this in closed session, and it's my understanding because the EDA took a public vote on this. Is that correct? Because this makes me very uncomfortable to be put in this kind of situation where if I were to vote no on something like this, it would be a public vote of no as opposed to a negotiation of what we could be doing. That's number one. I have never, in my however many years I've been up here, ever seen this before, and that is very, very concerning to me. Number two, we have dozens upon dozens upon dozens of businesses in the county. We offer incentives to a handful, largely larger businesses that we're trying to get to locate into the county with a prescribed set of incentives that do have a termination date on them. The Knife Center that just came to us actually had a clause in there that allowed them to extend it up to 10 years, I do believe is what it was. This does not, correct? This is a whole new,
This is a new agreement, and we're careful to say this is not a modification, extension, expansion. This is
Correct.
a new agreement.
right, so the initial agreement expired.
The time period for the purchase was at the 5-year point. The funds that were committed at the beginning have not yet been expended. So there's funds not yet used, and the original agreement was 10 years. So that's where there's a little more complexity here than in the previous
Okay.
agreements.
So the original agreement
It's
is
still
10
in effect.
Okay, so the original agreement is 10 years.
Yes.
The thing that has changed is they went from a lease to a purchase, and they want to expand even more, and now they want the incentive agreement to reflect that larger investment that they're doing, and not the initial investment that they
Yes.
had started with.
Essentially terminating the original agreement short of its duration, normal duration, and supplementing or supplanting that with a new agreement for 10 years from now forward.
And see, and that's my frustration here, is that this should be done back there, where this conversation can be had in a very frank and open and honest, without the cameras on and the voices being recorded, to get to a position. I don't know if this is best for the county. I just don't. I know it's being presented to us, and I know it's going to be good for the business, which is fantastic. That's what they're supposed to do. But me as an elected official, I'm being presented with something that my people are telling me, and by my people, I mean the EDA and staff and others. I don't mean it my people, but staff, let me just say, that people on my side that are presenting me with an agreement that, again, these discussions shouldn't be held out here, and I'm frustrated by that simply because I'm not against it. I think it might be actually a fantastic thing. But is this the best? Is this the right way? Is this how we should do it? Can we incorporate what Mr. McLaughlin had said into that? Is there a clawback? I mean, there's lots of questions that go into this. It's not as simple as being put forward and, you know, the business is going to be investing, and so we should do it. And another one of my concerns is, and Mr. Benton had brought it up earlier, is, again, this does not stop anybody else, because we are breaking new ground, from coming and changing. And then, quite honestly, what stops a existing business that is here to say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. You just gave that guy all this money that I just saw on TV. I want the same thing. It's just bad form, in my opinion, and I won't vote for it simply because of that. Not that it's a bad deal, and not that I don't want our businesses to expand and grow and be the best that they can, and other businesses to come here because of that. I just don't think that this was done the right way, and I just can't in good conscience support this. So, but thank you.
I would defer to Carl for explanation of legal issues of why something can or cannot be.
I don't think there's any legal issues. I think he expressed his concern that, you know, often economic development deals, you know, are allowed to happen in closed session, and they normally do when they involve the county who's actually funding the agreement. Obviously, with the action, the EDA action having already been taken, that's not something that's available to the county at this time. So I don't know that there's any explanation needed. I think that's just an expression of Mr. Yakubowski's frustration.
And if I can comment, the piece as presented to EDA last year was that this piece was very important for the company to go ahead and make the purchase of the building, which would then allow them to reinvest and grow. So just so you know, what our thought process was this is what we need so that we can indeed purchase this building, continue to invest. So that was the thinking of the EDA at the time.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm not disagreeing with that, because there's been plenty of times where the EDA has come to us and said, hey, there's a proposal before us. What do you guys think? And we do that in closed session. We discuss it, and we give our blessing. It goes through the formalities of then going. That part never happened. And that's where my frustration is that I'm being brought in at the tail end to give a stamp of approval to a deal that has already been put together, which, again, might just be a fine deal. I'm not arguing that point. But it's the process, and again, never having seen this done this way before, I'm frustrated with that. And so I'm not saying that it shouldn't go forward. I'm just saying that I don't like the process. So,
And that
thank you.
process we will discuss at our next EDA meeting. We will discuss that process. Yes, sir.
Mr. Ross?
I'd just like to say, I have a constituent, and I won't name his name or his business, but he has a fine business in Spotsylvania County, and every time he comes up to renew pay his B-poll tax, he gives me a call and tells me how unfair of a tax it is. And I think this highlights that we do have some businesses that are, it's not really fair, right? First of all, it's not a fair tax, the B-poll tax, because it's taxed on revenue, not on profits. And second of all, new businesses coming often get a reduction or payback in B-poll, and then some that are here to retain get them. But I guess this is a good highlight of, let's look at repealing all of B-poll in Spotsylvania County like Stafford County has.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to Mr. Yakubowski's comments, which I appreciate. Just so you know, we didn't choose the method or the process. We made a request for amending or entering into a new agreement to assist a growing Spotsylvania County business. And it's not the fault of the EDA or Mr. Romero. They were trying to help this business, help and incentivize us to move forward. We would not have moved forward but for the recommendation of the EDA. They did all the right things. I don't know what happened with the process. It's been close to a year. I'm sure there's been some mix-up in the shuffle, but I want you to know that everything that was done by the EDA, Mr. Romero's office, was done to help this business, and we would not have moved forward but for the incentive being offered. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Marshall?
And Carl, this is more of a question based for you. If this incentive program is being presented as a new program, if it is denied tonight, can alterations or amendments be made to the current incentive program?
The current incentive program, it can be amended, correct. The agreement right now between the EDA and PMC, it was originally just a two-party agreement. They can certainly amend it, but, it's a necessary step, as part of the amendment, if there's going to be additional funds, that they come before the board and actually, get it funded.
Right.
So while the terms can certainly change even between the two parties, they will need to, I would imagine, come back before the board and actually get it funded if part of those new terms are additional incentives. And it could also be, as has been discussed, a new agreement where the old one goes away, which is what they're proposing, and we can enter into a new agreement, which typically now is a three-party agreement, which actually includes the board, to avoid situations where, the board is being asked, as it is here, it's actually a party to the agreement. That's the way we've been doing them more recently. So it depends, yeah. I mean, all those are options, but, at the end of the day, the board has to fund it. And I think that's what's being asked of the board here, is just whether or not the board wants to fund it and move forward. We would obviously work on all the terms and putting down the commitments, the usual clawbacks and protections in an agreement, and come back to the board with the agreement. Right now, I think the board is being asked to, decide whether or not it wants to fund and move forward with this incentive, draft up the agreement or not. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, and our agreement we drafted by our legal staff, correct?
Yes, we would, based on, the direction we get and the incentives that are approved by the board, we'll draft up the agreement, and we'll have the typical protections, clawbacks. We'll put all the usual language that's in there, but we really need to know if there's a deal or not at this point to move forward and actually discuss any of those terms.
Thank you.
Does anyone have a motion or direction for staff? I think one member has made his feelings clear, but the staff would like to. Mr. Skinner.
My question, just simple, is we're starting a new agreement for 10 years, by continuing the additional 5 years that was on the original incentive plan?
That's correct.
No.
Why couldn't we just continue with? And I've listened, but I didn't catch everything. But why can't we continue with just the original agreement for the next 5 years?
The term of the original agreement ends in which year is it, Tom?
It's
23?
2023.
23.
So this would then extend it another 5 beyond. So we did 5 years of the first 10.
Right.
This will then back up and be a new 10-year, which will make the entire program 15. So
the-
to go through 2028.
So the answer is yes, the county can certainly do nothing, not approve the additional incentive, and the original agreement will continue on and be paid out pursuant to those terms, Mr. Skinner, if that answers your question.
until those funds are expended, which is about 2 more years.
Well, I'll be very honest with you right now. I've listened, but I don't completely understand. And my idea would be to table this until we can sit down as a group, I think, and talk about it, whether it's just the supervisors or not. But I'm concerned about what we're doing, opening a door, setting a precedent. And as Mr. Yakubowski has said, what will the other companies do in that area?
So, Mr. Benton?
I'd like just to continue on what we've been doing with the company for right now. Maybe sometime later, towards the end of what they got, something can be changed. I don't know what can be done then, but then they can maybe go through the process that we've seen in the past. I don't know, I'm far enough on the nay fence where my vote would be nay right now.
Mr. Ross?
So, Carl, we can't talk about this. That was a recommendation by Mr. Skinner.
The supervisors, yeah, the supervisors can meet in groups of 2, pursuant to FOIA. But no, not as a group. You would have to meet again and discuss it, as we are here.
Okay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
So, Mr. Chair, one of the things that, I think this board over time has reduced BPAL with the goal ultimately of getting rid of BPAL because it's, it's a horrible tax. It's penalizing successful people. My dentist, for instance, pays a huge BPAL tax. It's not fair. It's based on his revenues, not, his gross revenues, not the net, which is, again, why I think over time we've tried to eliminate it, and I'd love us to eliminate it in the next year or so. It sounds like we may need to discuss this more.
Mr. Ross?
Yep. I would actually like to make a motion to pass, but I feel, so let me ask another legal question. If it fails, is it done for good, or would that be any different than tabling it?
If it fails, I'm trying to think, it would be done. I think it would fall under the typical consideration that, somebody who voted on the successful side would have to bring it back up. I'm not sure how it could be changed enough to make it new. But also keep in mind that the board doesn't have to do anything tonight as far as a vote. If it does nothing, the matter can continue on.
Okay.
But if the board would like to give some direction, either yes or no, obviously we would need a vote tonight.
Yep. Well, my feeling right now is that it would not pass. So I will withhold my motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. McLaughlin.
I'd like to table this until at least we can have some more discussion and Mr. Skinner's back so he can get the full story. Table to the next meeting, which is July 29th? What is it?
Would be July 9th.
Or how about the second meeting in July?
There's only
You
one
don't.
meeting in July.
July 9th.
All right. There's a motion on the floor to table until July 9th. Is there discussion? Mr. Benton? Aye. Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
This is to table it?
This is to table it.
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is the status of the 2014 transportation referendum, and we have our finance staff and transportation planner here.
I need that. Can I have that? Thanks. Sorry about that. It's okay. That didn't work. Good evening. May I please have the floor computer? So the board requested a status of the 2014 bond referendum related to transportation projects. And so that's what Doug and I are going to go through this evening and just give you some background on that and what has been issued to date, the status of the projects, and then also provide you an update on the transportation fund balance and where we are relative to the CIP that was just adopted in April for transportation. So the question that was approved by voters is here on the screen. And basically, the question was, should Spotsylvania County issue general obligation bonds in an amount up to $63.3 million to provide funding available together with other available funds to undertake certain capital projects, including but not limited to, and then there's a list of projects, and then at the very end, and other public roads requiring improvements. And so that question was approved by the voters as shown here. 54% voted yes, 46% voted no. It passed by a slim margin, as you can see here. The authority to issue bonds expires at the 8-year mark, which is November 2022. But the county does have the ability to petition the court, and the court has the ability to potentially grant a 2-year extension such that the period of time that we could issue the bonds would be a full 10 years versus the original 8. That 10-year period, should the court grant us a 2-year extension, would expire in November 2024. In terms of what was originally contemplated when the estimate was derived for the referendum and what has already been issued to date is what is being shown here in these next couple of slides. You can see there the estimate for the referendum. The projects are on the left. The estimate for the referendum is what we were thinking at the time would be spent over the 10-year period. To date, what has been issued is shown in the column that says issued, and then remaining is the difference between those two columns. So I won't go through each of these, but you can see here what has been issued to date. Note that some of the projects that were specifically spelled out in the question, nothing has been issued to date. There are other projects that fall into that and other transportation projects category that weren't specifically listed in the referendum, but we have issued funding for those. And then here on this second page is the total estimate for the referendum was $63.3 million. To date, we have issued $6,180,000, and remaining as of today in the referendum authority is $57.1 million. In terms of what was planned or what is planned in the adopted CIP to be issued for these projects, that's this next series of slides that has the heading Referendum Authority Planned. So this summer, the only project for which we're planning to issue bonds is the Exit 126 project, specifically the Route 17 and bridge widening. $2.3 million is planned to be issued this summer for that project. And then in the fiscal year 21 through 24 column, these are the amounts in the CIP that we expect to issue over that period of time, assuming those projects move forward as planned in the currently adopted CIP. Over on the right-hand side, relative to what was originally planned in the referendum specific to these projects, you'll see what's remaining. So, for instance, the Exit 126 project, the original estimate in the referendum was $32.2 million. By the time we get to the end of the CIP planning period and really the authority period to issue these bonds, we will have about $30 million of that referendum authority remaining. But you can also see down there at the bottom, for instance, the removal of the Route 3 bump outs project. There was no specific amount originally planned in the referendum. We have issued money already for that. We plan to issue additional funding, and so the remaining balance there is negative $2.5 million. Overall, the referendum authority by the end of fiscal year 24, based on the CIP as it is adopted, there will remain $30 million on the referendum authority. And so now Doug will go through the project status. Thank you.
So with that, thank you, Bonnie. The projects that we have and that are underway, of course, we have Exit 126. And the status of that project is it is undergoing. VDOT is managing that project. We have paid $1.5 million towards PE, which is currently underway right now. And the right-of-way is due in FY20. Exit 118, I'm sure if anybody's been out there, they see the large amount of work that's been done, the lot amount of work that's been completed. VDOT managing the project again. We have paid $12 million of the county's $12.6 million budgeted, and the full share of the west and connector portions of that project have not been budgeted, but it's planned in the CIP. The east in operation date was 12/19, and west operation date is 12/2022. The corridor studies, I've been talking to each one of you individually on those corridor studies. They are completed. The listed projects have been identified and itemized. They stem from those studies. They're presented to the board as well as the Transportation Committee. They've been prioritized, and they are also going to be included in the thoroughfare plan portion of the comprehensive plan. So that way everything can be itemized and identified from those projects of the corridor studies. The Harrison Road, Old Plank and Gordon, this is a VDOT managing project, the widening from Old Plank to Gordon Road intersection, that small little section in between there that's just 2 lanes. We have currently paid $500,000 towards PE, which is currently underway, and the right-of-way phase now is expected to begin FY 2021. The Ely's Ford Route 3 project, we looked at that several times. We looked at relocation at the National Park Service. We've met with them numerous times. They wanted to switch property, relocate, and that was part of the 2014 bond referendum when we went through that process. The options supported by the National Park Service was very, very cost prohibitive, and the project was actually set aside with revenue sharing reallocated to the board by the board for Thornton Rolling Road Route 17 project, which was done in 2015. Grand Brooks project was completed in 2005 with the referendum authority. The Hickory Ridge Route 1 project was completed in 2005, was also with that authority. The removal of the Route 3 bump outs, as Bonnie had stated, those were allocated funds. They were put into the CIP. VDOT managing those projects. We've paid $500,000 towards PE, which is currently underway. The right-of-way phase is expected to begin in 2021. The last slide here is the roundabout in Old Plank, at Old Plank and Chancellor Road. That is a developer proffered improvements. The county has been in the process working with them, getting agreements together. They have budgeted $1 million share from our cost with the developer. They are underway with that VDOT plat. VDOT has been reviewing their site plan. It's under second review, and the right-of-way plats have been delivered to the planning office last week. Bloomsbury Road improvements, the small section of road Monument Court from at the end of Bloomsbury, that was adopted by the board. The board had adopted that as a revenue or a rural additions project. VDOT is managing that projects. They have been included into the pavement schedule, and they should be beginning that 2020 or early 2021. The roundabout at Old Plank and Endora, this is planned in the outer years of FY '21 and '23. And the Spotsylvania Parkway Hospital Boulevard, that has also been formally accepted now by VDOT. It is in the VDOT network of secondary road systems, and that is planned for out years in the CIP for 2022, and that's just for final pavement or maintenance.
And then in terms of the transportation fund, this is where all the things that we've just talked about come together, really. And you might ask what is definitely a logical question. Bonnie, if we have $30 million in referendum authority remaining, why don't we just issue it? And again, totally reasonable question, but the affordability comes into play. And I really think there are 3 prongs to affordability. 1, do we have the referendum authority for it? And the answer to that is yes. 2, what ability do we have to issue these bonds and remain within our fiscal policies related to debt issuance? And that is something that we have definitely been improving on over the last number of years. We do have the space there that we could issue these bonds and remain within our debt policies. But the third and final piece is the piece that we continue to bump up against each year when we talk about the budget, and that's the ability to fund the principal and interest payments on this debt that we issue with the funding that's available in our transportation fund. And so what I am showing here at the top, obviously there's 2 graphs, there's 2 scenarios. The one on the left-hand side is our transportation situation based on current projections, including the fuel tax projections from PRTC, and expenditures primarily driven by our debt service, which is 100% driven by what's in our adopted CIP. So you can see there the space in between the blue revenue line and the red projected expenditures line, that's a budget deficit. That budget deficit exists over on the right-hand graph too. And in the right-hand graph scenario, this is, you've heard Mary and me talk for years about the need to begin transferring additional revenue from the general fund to the transportation fund in order to stabilize and support the transportation fund. So this graph on the right shows if that additional transfer begins to be increased each year. There's still a deficit, but the space between the 2 lines in each year is less than what it is over on the left-hand graph, where there is no additional transfer from the general fund. The space between those lines in each graph is the budget deficit, which would have to be funded by the transportation fund balance. Now, in terms of the status of the transportation fund balance, as heads are spinning, down at the bottom, if you look at the column that's labeled without additional, that's the status of the fund balance, the transportation fund balance moving forward if no additional transfer is made from the general fund each year beyond the $700,000 that we started a number of years ago. You can see there that based on current projections and based on the CIP as it has been adopted, by the time we get to fiscal year '24, we will have run out of and into the negative on the transportation fund balance. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that. We will have to find another way to provide some funding to that fund or scale back on the projects that are in the CIP in order to balance that fund. However, if you look at the right-hand column on that bottom table with additional, this is what the transportation fund balance is projected to be in each of those years if, in addition to the $700,000 base transfer from the general fund to the transportation fund, we add the transfers that are in the additional transfer column on the left. If in fiscal year '21, for instance, we transfer the original base $700,000 that's in the budget now, plus an additional $700,000 that's shown here, our transportation fund balance that year will be $7 million. the next year. If, in addition to the 700,000 that's in the base, we transfer another 900,000, our transportation fund balance will be 5.9. And you carry that logic on down, and you see that by the time we get to 2024, the transportation fund balance is still declining, the same way that it is in the without additional transfer column. But it's not in the red. We are able to balance through fiscal year 24. And so I'm providing you this information because, again, I know there is a desire by the board, or at least by certain board members, to do additional transportation projects. And that obviously comes with a cost of paying back the principal and interest. And I'm trying to be very transparent here that unless there's another source of revenue, we're not going to be able to do that and balance the transportation fund.
And to follow up on that, these numbers are representative of what has already been approved, the funding that we're getting allocated from Smart Scale, revenue sharing, CMAQ, RSTP. These are actual numbers with all those dollars included.
So that's our last slide, and I'm sure there's some questions after that. So.
It says the court can give permission for the 2 additional years. It looks like we're kind of counting on that. How confident are we that the court will do so?
We have petitioned the court since I've been here at least 2, if not 3 times to extend the referendums, and they have done that in each case. This is something going back to when we were planning for the fiscal year, the 2014 referendum. I know the finance staff continually said we should not plan our projects to assume the additional 2 years, but that is a potential if the court grants it.
Anyone else on the board have any comments or questions? Mr. Jakubowski?
Just a couple. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I think it's very important for not only board members to understand, but I think the public can understand too the situation that we're in. Traffic is a mess. We have growth coming. It's not going to stop. It keeps getting approved, and we're not spending money to fix the roads that are already bad. That's really summing it up in a very negative way, I know, but that's the situation. I can't think of anybody who tells me, wow, the traffic around here is fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. So either we recognize the issues that we're facing or we don't. And I'm not about to ignore what is going on. It's only going to get worse. We have thousands upon thousands of units that have been approved that will be coming into the system. It might be 20 years, but you know what? As I've gotten older, and I won't tell you how old I am now, I just celebrated a birthday, but it goes quickly, and it keeps going more quick. And the longer that we put it off, the more pain we're going to feel in the future. The 2014, actually, let me go back to the 2005 bond referendum that was done was basically the 6-year plan from VDOT put onto the ballot. Turns out that the numbers were wrong, so we did certain things. We had a value engineer that came in to look at the numbers to tell us, you know, Smith Station was, I don't remember, 75, 90 million, whatever it was, to widen it to 4 lanes. And so what was done at that time was, well, what can we do with the money that we have and we're able to pay for it to get something accomplished? I know a lot of dirt roads were paved over the past 10, 15 years, and a lot of rural areas that needed safety improvements were taken care of. And I'm glad that we did that because, you know, those type of projects never find their way to the top of revenue sharing, or especially when the state got rid of rural revenue. I forget the name of it. It was something like that, where they would, you know, help out. You know, those projects would always fall through the cracks and just would never, because there's just not enough traffic on them. Having said that, when we asked the voters in 2014 to approve the referendums, we did so with specific projects in mind. Some of them, such as the Ely's Ford one, the National Park Service, which I would again ask if we can pressure our Congress people to get on the ball and really push the National Park Service, if for nothing else, for safety reasons. As Route 3 intersection with Ely's Ford, we don't even have turn lanes, which it's just unconscionable that they don't allow us to do that. We are moving ahead on a few things, but what you have basically brought up is that our CIP for transportation, we have been spending that with no problem. But we have not been adequately funding the transportation fund to cover those costs. We did transfer out, and it's been many years, the decal fee. That was 9, 10, whenever that was. But that money into the general fund, but that money has not been put back in. But that money was specifically set in there to pay for these projects. So basically, we've been spending more money than we've been, in the future, but we have not been putting in the money there to cover the cost of what we need to do. The projects are just going to get more costly. The projects are just going to get more needed. And I really fear that we will get to a point where gridlock is so bad in our county that we will be undesirable for business and for large entertainment and other things that would ease the tax burden on our residents, because our gridlock is to the point that nobody wants to be here. Those positions to get in are not good ones. It only leads to to more problems. I'll just put it that. I don't mean to be so doom and gloom, but it really is just not getting better. And one point that I do want to make on your very last slide there, we bring in roughly $6 to $8 million in the general fund. We had this discussion a few meetings ago when the board voted to authorize pay increases in the future for public safety. Those additional transfers that you have listed on the left-hand side, if you total it up, if we wanted to keep even and not fall behind slowly, we would have to do 2.2 plus 1.6, 3.8 million of a transfer next year just to keep up with what we're doing, correct? Am I reading that correctly?
No, this is saying that by the time we get to fiscal year '24, we're going to need to find another $1.1 million that year.
Right, but if you add up the column, the additional transfer on the left, right, you will need that by 2024. We're going to need all of that money.
In each year, yes, we're going to need all of that money, but it's not cumulative. By the time we get to 2024, we're not going to need the sum of those. We're going to need that 1.1 plus the 700,000 that's currently in the base. We're going to need a $1.8 million transfer that year.
Right, but that's for the 1 year. But then the previous year is another amount, and that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So if you total that amount up, and we wanted to do what you have here over the 4 years in 1 year, you would need the total amount of about 3.6 transfer.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I say that to say that 3.6, then you're looking at $6 to $8 million if we were to do that, which we're not going to, of course. You're looking at 3.6 coming out of that 6 to 8 million. My point is, there's just not enough revenue to do everything that we're looking to do without, which I really think what we need to do is recommend a penny on the tax rate that goes directly towards these projects. That, I think, is the cleanest way to do it. Everybody understands that. They know what is happening. And these are the projects that the voters said that we should do. And I think that it is a shame that Exit 126, granted, did get smart scale for that project, which it turns out that there was an additional cost that went into that one too, because somebody forgot to add a bridge into the project. But we remain $30 million at Exit 126. And that's the biggest concern that I have and that people raise to me is just the traffic gridlock that we have there. I challenge anybody. I'm sure y'all guys have all gone down there. You stay away on Saturdays and Sundays. You stay away at rush hour. It is an absolute mess. So thank you for bringing this to attention. I hope that this just doesn't die with this presentation, but we continue it on because it is incredibly important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the board? If Not, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that brings us to Fire and Rescue Volunteer LoSAP, Length of Service Awards Plan Update. We have Chief Conlon and Chief Irby here.
Well, good evening. This evening we're going to be proposing and discussing some changes to the volunteer LoSAP program, which is the Length of Service Awards Program or Plan. Just some brief information on some of these slides to provide you some additional background and what we're aiming to achieve with this. We can go in to further detail into the actual plan itself, which you should have copies that were in your packet of both a marked up copy and a final copy. The existing LoSAP program was put in place in the year 2000 through a resolution to recognize and reward volunteer fire and rescue members in the county. Also trying to attempt additional recruitment and to encourage retention of the existing members. It used a system of points to determine eligibility for credit to qualify for the program, and it addressed the contributions of both administrative members and operational members. So in essence, but we'll talk about another group that was not included, but in essence it covers the contributions of those members that are out actively running calls, as well as those that are doing essentially the business side of the fire and rescue service and the volunteer agencies. We use a third-party vendor to manage the program investments and payments. That vendor currently is called Hometown, and the program actually includes a life insurance policy. It's I think a $10,000 life insurance policy for every member that qualifies. The challenges with the existing program, while definitely good intentions of putting the various components in place of it, the system of points, there was never actually any criteria that identified what a point was. Some took that to mean that a point was a duty shift. Others took that as a point was an hour of the duty shift. So it has created some pretty significant inconsistencies as far as who actually qualifies for the program amongst the volunteer agencies. It focused significantly on the ancillary components of fire and rescue, specifically in a volunteer agency, meeting attendance, fundraising, things like work details, other non-staffing activities. It also left some room for improvement, let's just say that, as far as some administrative policies regarding leaves of absences. There were some gaps in how it actually described how some of those would be handled, including military leave of absence. The issue that I alluded to on the previous slide, while it recognized operational members and administrative members, it did not include the auxiliary members of the agencies. So Spotsylvania Volunteer Fire Department specifically has a very active auxiliary that supports the entire fire and rescue system. Chancellor Fire and Rescue also has party or personnel that perform those functions, but I believe they are recognized more of administrative members. So it's kind of a membership classification that got left out of the program. Through the past at least 18 months that we've been discussing this program with the volunteer leadership, it's basically been acknowledged that the program is not currently useful for recruitment of volunteers or retaining most of the volunteers. I would say it is a useful program in retaining long-term volunteers, those that are looking to spend potentially 20 to 30 years in our system. But I'll be honest, that is a very rare situation these days. A lot of people just, we're seeing that as well sometimes in our career staff. People come for a few years and then life catches up with them and it becomes very busy. So you figure if you're trying to find time to volunteer, all the other demands of life are catching up on you. So to find a long-term volunteer that our system had benefited from for several years, it's very seldom that you find that member anymore. But I think it is important and it is a useful tool for rewarding those members that have contributed that significant length of years. Another issue that we identified in going through the program is the life insurance program premiums. For some of the volunteer members who are in advanced age, we are pretty close to paying the amount of benefit in the premium annually. So that's something that we will need to be able to address as we move forward. The new program, or essentially the recommendations that we've provided to you, builds upon the structure of the existing program. So it's the backbone of it is essentially the same. We just tried to provide some additional clarification for essentially points, spelling out what the criteria for those things would be. It specifies those hours of service, which centers around 40 hours per month, whether you're an operational member or an administrative member or an auxiliary member. And it does provide for that inclusion of the auxiliary members in the program. One note that we did finally recently identify that we left out of the plan is we need to include a date, presumably July 1st of 2019, of active participation with the agencies as an auxiliary member for them to be recognized. We're trying to add them to the program, and to be able to recognize prior service by auxiliary members, we would want them to have been a member in the system by July 1st of this year. That kind of reflects what was done in 2000 with the existing operational administrative members. We will continue to use I skipped one. It addresses the leaves of absence, including the military duty. So we were able to close the gaps in some of that criteria and what needed to be met and how that would be honored. It continues to use a third-party vendor to manage the investments and payments. Again, this is county funds that are provided to this program. They are essentially invested into mutual funds to develop that the fund that's available to pay out the benefits of the program. It's essentially a retirement program. So we use that third-party vendor that advises us on those investments and actually takes care of the actual cutting the check, so to say, for the volunteers. Some of the drawbacks as far as what is being presented currently. The life insurance program still needs to be restructured, but we can come back and do that at another time. The Chancellor Volunteer Fire and Rescue Leadership is not in favor of proposed levels of participation. Their concern, which I'll ask President Steve Dove to come up in just a second to help voice his concerns. But they have a concern of the 40 hours of duty hours for operational personnel. There's a feeling amongst their agency that those hours should be for any volunteering time that's committed to the system at all. While I definitely recognize the value of that level of participation in any of those areas to the county, what I'm bringing you is what the work group, which consisted of all three volunteer agencies, the majority of the agencies, 2 out of 3, recommended that we stay with the 40 hours of actual operational duty shift staffing, which is the key component they're trying to focus on. Again, it's still not viewed as a useful tool for volunteer recruitment primarily or retention of some of the younger members. Quite honestly, it's just like the workforce. We try to recruit a lot of younger people into the volunteer system, and they're not thinking about retirement when they're coming in at the age that they are. So we need to look at some other options to draw people in, to hold on to them, that they would see as a more rewarding benefit. So we are including in the proposal a recommendation to cap the entry into the program at July 1st, 2019. So if it was approved, if someone was not a member of one of the agencies by that time, we would no longer roll them into eligibility for the LoSAP program following that. Thought process being, instead of continuing to add to the number of people that would potentially need to have funds invested and eventually paid out, we could use those annual contributions that are continuing to be added to the investments to actually use for more useful, more effective incentive programs. We're actually working to put together a committee of volunteers to identify what those potential incentives could be. Whether it's, one of the things that was thrown out was potentially some kind of tuition assistance program, potentially working hand in hand with the local community college to be able to provide eligibility for members or their families, identifying essentially a dollar amount that may be available per year for those people. That's one idea that's been thrown out. But looking at things that people are basically going to be enticed to continue volunteering, hopefully coming into the system as well. This is just not continued to be a useful program. Unfortunately, I think we've outgrown it. With that, I would like to, if it's okay with you, call Mr. Dove up to speak to the concerns that Chancellor has with this, just so we can have that kind of full disclosure with this.
Oh, thank you, Chief, and good evening. The Chancellor Volunteer Fire and Rescue Department does support the 480 hours annually for our volunteers to meet the requirements of LoSAP. Our concern is that our current program enables a volunteer to earn points for meeting participation, committee attendance, training and drills. All these things need to be kept up to be a volunteer. It's just not about staffing the apparatus. Under the proposal of the new program, it is our understanding that participation is being defined as solely being on that emergency apparatus. It would not include the training that the volunteers would go after. It would not include meeting attendance or committee attendance, i.e. the volunteer committee that will be looking at additional incentives. That time would not count to a benefit such as LoSAP under this current proposal that we're looking at tonight. That is the objection that Chancellor takes. We believe that any time a volunteer does give, there should be that eligibility to whatever incentives being provided. So we certainly agree to the hours of 480 annually, but we do believe that all hours of that 480 that a volunteer would do should apply to that LoSAP benefit.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Mr. Chair, so I've sat through a number of different meetings, and with Chancellor, with Chief, and I also spoke with Spotsylvania Fire and Rescue. And it seems that, again, the consensus is to terminate the future enrollment in LoSAP on 1 July. There's no questions about that. That seems to be the right thing to do. Everybody else agrees that it's not working in the intent of being the a retention tool. And I think I have heard a lot of people like the idea of the educational benefit. If we can get a good year out of a volunteer, I think Germanna, a full-time student's $5,000 a year. I mean, if we could get a volunteer, full-time volunteer almost, or half-time for $5,000, that's a great benefit for the county. I even suggested maybe even be able to pass the benefits on to their children or something like that, just like the GI Bill does. I think it's a great opportunity for low cost to get more support into those volunteers. For the most part, it sounds like the only sticking point that I've seen between everybody was what constitutes good time. If those 40 hours, and I do understand it's 40 hours a month or roughly, but it's 480 a year. ultimately, whether, you don't have to do 40 a month.
Right. It can be higher or lower
Right.
each month. It just has to equal that much.
So, based on, talking to you, Chief, you did say this is really a volunteer program. And again, it has been some of the concerns about, how do you manage it and do what again, goes back to, I agree with Chancellor that training is volunteer time, because if, they do have day jobs, they do have families, they do other things. This is on above and beyond all of that. So training should count. And, all the things that we ask them to do above and beyond their regular duty, I think should count. And I did speak to at least Mr. Ross about this as well. And what I would like to see, and I understand everybody's concerns, and I did speak to Spotsy about this, and the concern was, are we going to set different standards? What I would like to see is let the volunteer agencies establish what is 40 hours of good time. Let's implement the program as stated, other than the condition that we go with the volunteer agencies establish what is a 40 hours of eligible volunteer time, and then it reported back on a monthly and annual basis back to FREM, so we understand that, get a feel for how the program's going. And then we can reevaluate later if needed, because we do have other things we have to come back and talk about. We do have the insurance, and I think there's a couple other things that we got to go back and look at. So I don't know if there's anybody else having any other discussion on this? Yes. You do? So I'll stop there for now.
Mr. Benton?
Well, we're saying this isn't really a very good recruiting process anyway, or thing for the, we're saying, so I understand completely. We're doing away with the LoSAP as of July 1st of,
We would essentially cut off eligibility for new members
okay.
at that line.
All right. What specifically are the benefits that they receive if they meet these hourly?
It essentially, based upon their years of service, they max out at a payment of 200 once they, I think it's
It's 25
25
years, so
years.
it's $10 per month at entitlement age of 65 for their years of service, with a maximum benefit of $250 per month.
So it for 30 years, it could, or 10 years, I'm sorry, it could be $30,000.
So we're basically saying volunteerism isn't really volunteerism, because they're already getting their property taxes, at least on one vehicle, free. The volunteers are getting paid to some degree for their, if I'm speaking wrong, please let me know.
There's the per diem, which is essentially a stipend that is intended to cover the costs of volunteering. I will say that one thing we will need to be very careful of is there's a line of transition that goes from having someone being a volunteer to what they could be considered an employee. So the value of the benefits provided, there is a line that we need to make sure that we do not cross there.
Do you know how much the county spends, or I won't say spends, donates to overall to all agencies, volunteer agencies, for the personal property taxes a year?
Bonnie has that number and she left.
And this is
we
where they
looked
get,
at
they
that
get to
recently.
pick the vehicles, so they could have a $600.
Yeah, it's not significant, so it's not astronomical by any means. So that's pretty modest.
Yeah, but if I have a vehicle where I'm, if I've just bought a brand new vehicle, I'll put that thing on my response vehicle, and that's what we could, 600 to 800 or so a month, depending on what you've purchased.
I don't disagree.
I'm not a month, but
we don't have many volunteers driving around in Porsches, but
that's true. Well, you buy a truck nowadays,
That's
even
true.
a used one, you're high 20s, 30s, 40s. So
yes, sir.
I mean, it doesn't take much for that to start adding up. So you're already giving them that. We're giving them a stipend. There's been some that have basically turned the firehouse into their home. I mean, the life insurance, why are we doing life insurance when if they're injured or killed on the line of duty, they get the same as a
This
regular
is
full-time
actually
or
outside of line of duty benefits. So this
So if
is
they just
essentially
die?
yes, sir.
I mean, it just goes beyond. I never volunteered like that. I never took any kind of money from the county or, relief from the county on personal property or anything else when I volunteered. I enjoyed it. It was a service to my community. Thought it was helping. And, you know, society just isn't like that anymore. So we're talking about all this stuff, and, I mean, we are giving some decent benefits already, in my opinion. You're getting, if you want to go into this as a career, you're certainly getting training for it free. You're getting your vehicle personal property tax taken care of if you're a full-time member. You're getting stipends now. Now we want to give retirement, or supposed to be giving retirement. I mean, where does it end? That's my personal feelings on it. Volunteering is not really volunteering anymore.
I'll admit that there are plenty of members that do not take advantage of this, or the per diems. So there are several, still plenty of members in each agency that do it out of the good of their heart and do not really even take advantage of the incentives that are available to them.
That's commendable. And then that's not even mentioning the end of the year stuff, where if you do have hours, you get potential trips and stuff given to you as far as, you know, equipment and stuff like that come, I'm sure, from the donations our citizens have made to the volunteers. So, I mean, there's perks if you take advantage of them. And I commend those that don't and actually volunteer.
So, Mr. Chair, I just want to follow up with one thing, and I don't, we're here talking LoSAP today, and all of the things that you brought up, I think, are supposedly, they're going to be addressed. And the idea is to kind of start setting those baselines that this is the requirement to rate those particular benefits. Now, again, I think you're doing, the right thing is you're ending the LoSAP because it doesn't work. It's not doing what it's done, but at some point in the past, a commitment was made to these volunteers. And again, I think we need to honor that commitment at this point. There's question about what the requirement was, how many hours, what type of hours. You know, again, I think ultimately it was left to the volunteers to decide that. So that's why I want to put it down on them. Again, the department still set what the requirement is to be a member. So Spotsylvania or Chancellor can choose, the baseline's 40 to qualify for the program. If Spotsylvania, I believe, wants to use 48 is the baseline to be a member, and I believe it'll be 48 hours of operating in an apparatus or whatever it's going to be qualify. So if you don't qualify as a member, you don't qualify for the LoSAP, and I think Chancellor will establish theirs. But I think we have to look at, so what is, I've asked the same, what's the requirement to qualify for the tax exemption? And I think those things need to be established, baselined for each one of these efforts, so we do have better control over what's occurring, and then we can move forward and potentially, hopefully, recruit more volunteers to fill some of the gaps that chief has, and without, you know, having to go overtime, without having to hire more firefighters, and get more community involvement. But I don't want to do things to deter volunteerism, and I'm afraid if we make it more and more difficult for somebody that already is stuck in traffic, has kids playing sports, has a day job, and then we want them to volunteer, and then we place more and more burdens on them. That's why I think people are going to say, you know, I'm not going to do it. So if we can get volunteers, you know, ease the burden on them, maybe they'll come to the fire stations. Maybe we give them a better incentive vacation. Maybe we get more volunteers in the fire stations. But that's kind of where I want to see us go. And again, I didn't mean to, this is the LoSAP discussion. I know the chief was going to bring other ones further, and I kind of wanted to focus on this one, then talk, you know, personal property, talk insurance, talk those other ones, get them all baselined so we get a nice, smooth transition in the future. That's what I just want to bring up.
Mr. Ross.
So I would just like to add, and that was well said, and I hesitate to say this, but moving forward, how do you feel you're doing with volunteer retention and recruitment? You're losing volunteers, correct?
Correct.
Can you put that in quantitative amounts, just high level? I guess you're struggling to retain and recruit
I would say
volunteers.
that over the past few years that you've probably seen each volunteer agency, it's had ups and downs, but you've probably seen at least a 20 to 30% reduction in the number of members.
And for each volunteer that serves the county 480 hours a year, what roughly does that save the county? As you put a dollar, I know in some cases you can't put a dollar amount on saving a life or things like that, but as far as staffing, your staffing needs on the career side.
It it would essentially save you, concept is 20% of a full-time position.
Which would be
So
roughly.
one-fifth of that. So if you look at a base level firefighter salary and benefits in the area of 65,000, my numbers could be off.
Sure.
So you're looking at about 20% of that.
Okay. Well, I certainly think that saves the county a lot of money. So there is a good return on investment by putting some in the future. And again, I know we're just trying to baseline things right now, and I agree with baseline
That's
first. But
the
I
staffing component is that.
Sure.
So
But I'm fully supporting doing some really out-of-the-box kind of thinking to recruit and retain volunteers in the future.
Mr. Marshall?
Mr. Chairman, first off, Chief, adding the auxiliary members, I think it's a great idea to add them to this program. Those, it's mostly ladies, but there are a few gentlemen that are involved with the auxiliary. They go out of their way not only to help our community here, but they've traveled to other communities during disasters and helped out several times. I know they took a little trip to Charlottesville not too long ago, and that's very admirable of them. It's wonderful to reach out and help somebody else when they're in need. That's great that we have that. I agree that training should count in this program, and I think that's something everybody knows how I like to do numbers, so I'm sitting here scribbling. If we, with the 480 hours that are required, if we allow, you do with 52 weeks and 8 hours a week, you get to the 416 for hours. If we were to allow the other 64 hours to count, up to 64 hours to count for training and meeting attendance, I think that would get us to maybe a compromise between all three organizations, and give credit to those that are putting the time in to do the training, which you want your volunteers well trained. That's that always, it's continuous. Everything always changes. Automobiles change all the time, so we need continuing training for the volunteers. As far as just to address the personal property tax relief that was given to the vehicles, that predates our LoSAP program, and that was done with absolute good intentions. We didn't have, I can recall when I volunteered for Spotsylvania Volunteer Fire Department, we had 8 fire stations, and we used our personal vehicles to respond to calls. You would show up on the scene of a structure fire, you'd have a fire truck, a tanker, and 7 pickups. That's where your personnel came from at night, because we didn't have career staffing. And that's, everybody had a little red light on their dash, and that was why you had the personal property tax relief. So it was functional and a good thing to have, and I'm to continue that, giving a man a $500 break on his personal property tax and for pulling 480 hours is a pretty good deal. But I would like to see this program, I would like to see us take a vote on this program tonight as a board, because I think this is, I know you've been working on this for over a year. You've had to, in your red line version, you've had to cross out 8s and replace them with 9s. So I'd like to see something happen to lock down these benefits for volunteer personnel.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Benton?
what are we going to consider training? Is it when you're pulling a shift, you're doing training like regular career folks do during the day of their shift, or are you talking about outside a shift where they come in and do rural water supply or actual fire class? What are we going to consider training? Sitting out in the bay tying knots? I mean, where is that line that we're going to draw, or if we're going to draw one? And you had a majority of this, that we required these folks to get together and as 4 entities, basically, 3 volunteers and the career, and the majority coming back to us and reporting this is what the majority, only one outlier, telling us this is what they're recommending. Now we're wanting to change what the ones that we told to go do this and come back to us. Now we're changing what the requirements are going to be. So
So, Mr. Chair, and again, what I want to point out is, and this goes back to what I've said on other departments as well, I don't think it's our job to micromanage the chiefs and those organizations. And they've come back, and if we establish 40 hours, we're establishing 40 hours as the baseline. I think it's incumbent upon those chiefs of the rescue squads and the fire departments to determine what is considered good training hours, whether it's training, whether it's running an apparatus, whether it's, volunteering in the community. I think it's up to them. They've been elected to do that job. I don't see why we should be sitting there dictating how or what they should be doing. That's getting into a really way into the weeds that I don't think the board should have to play.
Just if I can comment on that real quickly. I certainly respect what you're saying, and I agree with that in 99.9% of aspects of letting the volunteers run their organizations. We're bringing this to you tonight, though, because they have not been able to do that on a consistent manner. The inconsistencies between the agencies, because they have not been able to come to an agreement, has created, I would say at times, significant turmoil and conflict. That's what we're trying to avoid. So we're just trying to provide a little bit more structure to them to be able to manage their agencies effectively within themselves.
I understand that, and I think having this discussion here, this is one of the first times it's been brought up to us as far as that. And that I think, that's what I'm saying. I would like to push through what, and I'm going to make the motion for what I had discussed earlier, but I think it's up to, there's Mr. Dove right there, it's up to him. If he can't perform, either Chancellor removes him or we revisit this program in the future. But again, we're talking a very few, again, we're talking about, we're eliminating the program. We're only talking about the few members that are actually eligible. And I think, if I might ask, how many do you think might be eligible for this program? So we're talking about 13 within the Chancellor system that would still be grandfathered in. And again, they still have to do 480 hours of volunteer time in support of the Chancellor volunteers to be eligible for, at 65, 200, if they did 25 years, full service, they'd get $250 a month. So I don't think we're asking a lot here. So with that, I will make the motion that we go forth with the chief's suggestions, what he presented here, except that I want the volunteer agency to determine what's considered 40 hours of good time. I want them to report back monthly to the chief and annually to the chief based on what were the volunteers and what hours and what type of duty did they run.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Benton.
I will not support that. This is what got the volunteers in the position they were. All three of our agencies had different SOPs and everything else. When you got on the scene, one was doing one thing, one was doing another, and there was no continuity between us. That's what got us in trouble, allowing the chiefs to dictate what they were going to do for their organization. If we did that, we'd have Confederate flags and everything else over in Chancellor's, if we allow them to do that on their patches. So absolutely not. This should be dictated by the three majority agencies, FREM, I'm sure Spotsylvania, Volunteer Rescue Squad, and Spotsylvania Fire Department, I'm assuming, is there, that came and has given us a recommendation. If you're going to allow that, you're going to have one that's going to be very skimpy on it, and everybody's going to want to go over there or stay over there so they can run less hours and do nothing. Or you're going to have some that are so strict that, nobody wants to come to them. I mean, you got people that you have faith in, that you've given the responsibility to go and bring back recommendations to us, and then we just want to change it. That's not what we should do. I will not support it. I'll make an amendment that we allow as is, but I can't support it like just going to let each one just pick and choose what they want to do. That's what's got us in trouble in the past, and it's going to bite.
Mr. McLaughlin, did you?
Mr. Chair. Mr. McLaughlin, would you accept a friendly amendment to allow up to 64 hours for the training and meeting attendance? As up to 64 hours off the current LoSAP program final document. So that would give because the only things they're missing are the meeting requirement and the training requirement is what they're looking for here. There's really not another aspect of, besides running, pulling duty hours and running calls. There's no other, I can't think of another component that could be added. Chief, correct me.
I would probably create a broader category of essentially other functions for that 64 hours, because it may be public education.
That's
It may
fine.
be
Yes,
those kinds of
absolutely.
things.
I'd support that.
Yeah, if we could just,
So I guess when you say up to 64,
up to 64 hours would be credited, you could credit for other functions. That still puts a 8-hour-a-week requirement for you to be in the firehouse with running calls and pulling duty. Staffing a fire, it still gives us a requirement of staffing.
I guess maybe I don't quite understand. I mean, maybe you come up and Chancellor had the issue.
Right.
So if you can,
And I guess maybe I can give you an example. Let's say that I have a EMS provider who's running a duty every week. In this particular month, they're going to run 2 duty shifts at 10 hours each duty shift. They've also decided they want to take an ITLS specialized course to get continuing education hour to maintain their EMT. So they travel to Henrico for that 16-hour course. Then they get the additional 4 hours by going to one of the elementary schools for a field day to do some public education work. Under the proposal currently, they would not qualify for LoSAP under this proposal because they have only achieved 20 hours of running duty shifts. There's 16 hours in the specialized training course outside of the area, and the 4 hours of public education would not count. We do not believe that is fair to the volunteer. The 40 hours in totality for that month should count. They were providing a service, community education, getting the training to be on the apparatus, and then actually being on the apparatus in that given month. And I believe the other 2 volunteer agencies would support that any time that is given from a volunteer should count for any incentive that's being provided.
The other, and just to clarify, the other 2 agencies have spoken against that. But I guess my question, would the 416 and, so the 480 hours annually of active participation with up to 64 hours of those other duties, do you think that would more adequately meet the needs?
Is the 480, is the 64 included in the 480, or is
Yes.
it in addition to?
Yes.
Included.
It's included into the 480. It gives you credit for it would give you credit for going. You could take and get credit for training hours and for public education if we done it as other functions.
Correct.
Right.
So-
It gives you a.
Ideally, you're looking on a monthly, about 36 hours monthly in a duty. The remaining could be in those other functions.
Yeah, you would
By the
have to
math
pull
of that.
an 8-hour duty a week,
Right.
52 weeks in a year requirement. It gives you credit for those other functions.
Or it could be all duty crews.
Or it could be all, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It
Support
gives you
that.
some flexibility there that you didn't have previously.
Mr. Marshall, I accept your amendment.
Thank you.
Is there further discussion? If not, we can vote. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, that takes us to closed meeting.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is your resolution to adjourn to closed meeting. There has been one addition, so Amy, I'll get you a copy of this. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the county, specifically the position of county administrator. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn to closed meeting for discussion concerning a prospective business or industry or the expansion of an existing business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business's or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community, specifically a sports and entertainment business. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn in closed meeting for consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, specifically related to the opioid epidemic. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn the closed meeting for discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or officers, and discussion of the terms of the scope of such contract where discussion in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically a contract for legal services and contract for utilities. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.23711A1, 5, 7, and 29, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforestated matters.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
And Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
I do too.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is your return to open meeting resolution. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.23712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene a closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair?
It's Mr. Ross.
I'd like to make a motion to direct the Spotsylvania County Utilities Public Works to decommission the FMC wastewater treatment plant no later than July 1, 2025.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
And Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I am pleased to respectfully request a motion to authorize the chair to execute an employment agreement between the board and Ed Petrovich as the county administrator. As discussed, this is for 2 years. His salary, which you had already approved, is $174,106.84. And again, that is for initial term of 2 years.
So moved. Mr. Yakubowski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Benton?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. And I believe we are ready for a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.